I've been around a while, around the block a few times, so I've published quite a few books on labor economics, including on racial inequality. I helped start the whole area of segmented labor markets back before anyone watching this was born. And most recently I've been working on minimum wages and also living wages in the United States. Well, what everybody focuses on is whether employment will fall as a result of raising the wage, which is the intuitive answer. Certainly any of our introductory economics students are taught that demand curve slopes downwards. When you raise the wage, there's going to be fewer people that employers want to hire. And then the question is that a good trade-off or not? And we find in the US, as has been found in the UK, that indeed the minimum wage has not reduced employment. And that's a surprising finding. I've done this most recently by comparing all the counties in the United States that border on a state, border where the minimum wage is different on one side from the other side. There are 30 states that have state wages higher than the federal minimum, and over 18 years. And we do a lot of econometrics, and we find there's no employment effect. We're also finding now that the minimum wage reduces labor market flows. That means turnover. And that's part of the way that the minimum wage gets absorbed by the labor market, because people want to know what's wrong with that Econ 1 model of the downwardly sloped demand curve. And the answer is there's a lot of friction in labor markets. There's a lot of turnover, and by raising the minimum wage, firms reduce their turnover. Also, in a friction model as opposed to a competitive model, firms can choose between having high wages and low turnover or low wages and high turnover. They're equally advantageous for most firms. But what happens is the minimum wage makes some firms go out of business, the ones that are paying very low wages, and the remaining ones expand and at a higher wage and higher productivity level. So we actually think they're a very good policy. In the current situation, also, they bring more purchasing power to people who spend their money right away, and they actually are a very good form of stimulus. And in the US it's very important because they don't raise taxes. You don't need to raise taxes to raise the minimum wage. So right now in New York City, there's a major controversy around the living wage. It differs from a minimum wage in that the level set is usually much higher. For example, the minimum wage right now is $7.25 at the federal level, and most living wage cities in the United States, there are over 100, set a minimum of about $11 an hour. And the same issues arise as to whether this is really affordable. Won't employers not be able to be competitive? The living wage is also different because it only covers workers who are on municipal contracts. So it doesn't cover the entire workforce. It also covers workers on who are working for employers where the city already owns the land, say in San Francisco, and at the San Francisco airport, where I've studied the living wage in great detail. And what I found in that context is that actually the turnover went down by half, and the wage rate went from what was then $5.15 an hour, the minimum, to the $10 plus range, which meant that our first line of defense against terrorism was now handled by more experienced guards, rather than people who just been there a couple of months and then quit. Wage standards are very important, and or labor standards, I should say, not just on wages, but also on working hours, training. One of the key reasons for the success of the San Francisco program that I mentioned is because it required training of the employees as well, so they became more adept at their job, more productive. And job generation, of course, having a recovery, unlike the one we're having now in the US, which is a wageless recovery and not a jobless recovery. So wages have not risen for quite a while, and how are we going to increase wages? Even when productivity is going up, wages don't rise anymore. Collective bargaining would help, but that's will take a lot of organizing. In the meantime, anything that raises wage standards, like minimum wages, and that facilitate them, like training programs, I think is going to be a bigger area of research. Well, right now the discussion is about the deficit and reducing the deficit. Deficits can be and should be reduced in the very long run, but for the medium and short term, we want to focus on what's happening now, which is we have an economy that's operating well below its potential, so that having a deficit doesn't crowd out any economic activity. It actually would be stimulus programs would crowd them back in. So instead of laying off teachers, teach our future, our young people, we should be having another stimulus program that's at least twice the size of the one that Congress passed in 2009. It's not likely at the moment that would happen, but I think that's a discussion that we need to have more and more, and I hope the President takes on the jobs issue in the coming presidential campaign.